Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. We are happy to be with you on Monday. It is draft week, which is always a very exciting time. The NFL draft is on Thursday, in case you were not aware. It is coming right up. But before we dive into everything, I wanted to let you know we are proud members of the Pigskin Podcast Network. So you can follow a lot of great shows on the network there. You can also find us on the Campus to Canton YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have a chance, please leave us a review and a rating on your favorite podcast app. That really helps us get the word out, and we greatly appreciate it. But before we dive into a whole bunch of fun things, including a special guest, Scott Barrett, who just popped up there with us. Dennis, how is your Monday going?
Well, my Monday is going great. I got my Scott Fishbowl invite. We got Scott Barrett on the show. My brother Scott's birthday's in a couple of weeks. I'm just loaded up on Scott. And then we come out of the intro and Scott Barrett is gone. And I'm like, oh no, what happened? But he's back.
It's the magic behind the scenes. And Matt will be with us in a few minutes. He is taking care of something else. But as mentioned, Scott Barrett from fantasypoints.com is with us. You can find him on Twitter at Scott Barrett DFB. Scott, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
So what's the DFB stand for?
It stands for Dude Fantasy Bro, which was my original handle for years. And I just struggled in obscurity with 200 followers for 4 years. And then one day I changed it to Scott Barrett DFB, and I gained 25,000 followers in 4 months. So people didn't want to follow a Dude Fantasy Bro, but yeah, that's the origin story.
All right on. Maybe I'll have to try that with my culture_coach one. Though I do try to put my name in there, so it does show me. I don't know what part of the handle you call it, but culture coach might be. I think people just hate underscores. That might be my thing.
It sounds like you're coaching people to be more cultured. Maybe that's the disconnect.
That was actually a job title I used to have. I was the culture coach when I worked at Ohio State University in campus dining services.
That's really cool.
My job was to make it a great place to work, and where other schools and universities came to get their food service professionals.
And now it's carried over. You're just tackling fantasy culture.
Right. Fantasy football is life.
Well, we did mention at the top, it is draft week. Hopefully everybody is aware. We're finally going to see where some of these prospects land so that we can start rookie drafts in earnest. Probably, around 7:05 p.m. on Saturday night is when the first ones are going to kick off, somewhere around when the live draft coverage ends. But, Scott, what are you excited about with the draft coming up?
I just can't wait for it to happen. It's my Christmas. Look forward to it every year. Just excited to see what happens and just watch and sit back and fire off some tweets from my couch in my underwear. So, Merry Christmas, guys.
My favorite part of the whole draft experience is my wife asked me when the NFL draft. I was like, it starts Thursday. So on Saturday, she said, well, when we get home, we got to watch draft day so we can prep. So we have to roll out. little wish fulfillment for the Cleveland Browns. So seems like there are a lot of rumors and stories that are kind of floating around out there. Are there any of them that you're taking serious? Any that you're completely discounting? I saw a couple of interesting mock drafts, including one from Peter King today that had Trayvon Walker going now number 1 to Jacksonville.
Yeah, I'm not really a big source guy, but I'll get secondhand source material fairly often. And so it's when I've heard things repeated that'll perk my ears up, like the Falcons really liking Drake London, George Pickens having serious off the field concerns that could cause him to fall to round 3 or beyond. And then, of course, a few days ago, he's involved in that car accident where the driver was arrested and he was the passenger, and just different things like that. That it's not going to play a role in my rankings, but and I can't bet in Texas, but on the draft. But if I could, I'd probably hammer that George Pickens over and things of that nature.
Man, you'd think in Texas that betting would be just fine. You can do just about everything there.
Yeah, I moved here from New Jersey, and it's like the only thing that New Jersey has on it. That and better pizza and better bagels.
Right. So with the now, do you follow the draft for mostly fantasy relevant positions? Or are you real interested in the defensive linemen, the offensive linemen, their impact on the teams?
It's just what I trust myself enough to analyze. So it's really just running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. I think I do a good job with that. I think I have a proven track record and an impressive hit rate. Quarterbacks, that's something I've just wholly abandoned. I've tried to do a model, and I found really nothing substantially predictive. So all I do for that is I look at projected draft capital. I talk to the film experts I trust, and I give a heavy weighting towards the more hyper-mobile quarterbacks. And otherwise, I just throw my hands up. And I'll do the same for basically every other position except for the flex-eligible fantasy positions.
Okay. Yeah, I want to think I'm smart enough sometimes to say, oh, well, if the Jaguars draft Evan Neal, it's going to mean this for Trevor Lawrence or this for Travis Etienne. And so often I'm wrong. But I still
that's certainly do. But then how I rank those players is just by draft capital, which is going to be the most predictive variable at any position. So it's like, yeah, if the Jaguars take an offensive lineman 101 or top 5, I'm going to slide that into my spreadsheets as saying they drafted a really high quality offensive lineman, things of that nature. But do I know if Evan Neal's, the best offensive lineman in the class? I really don't. I know that our guy, Greg Cosell, said he is. So, I'll trust draft capital, and I'll trust Greg, who's one of the best in the industry and has been for multiple decades. But outside of that, yeah, I tend not to spend too much time on the other positions.
Yeah, I listen to John Hansen just about every morning, so I get a fair share of Adam Kaplan and Greg Cosell every week. It's part of the highlight to start my day. With the so you talked about your models, and so did you have a career before fantasy football that involved statistical modeling and things like that? Is that how you was that part of your path, or how did you get to where you're like, I'm going to build models and see how this works for me?
No, not really. I was a very mediocre math student all throughout high school and college. I worked briefly at a hedge fund, and I really fell in love with that. I really enjoyed that work. I was supposed to get hired after I graduated college full time, but the owner of that hedge fund sold the firm maybe like 4 months before I graduated from college. I tried to get into that industry. My father worked on Wall Street for decades, but no luck. And then I worked a number of odd jobs. I was a bartender for a number of years, and then I fell back in love in fantasy, working a 9-to-5 job I didn't love, and I really just spent all my time with that. And then part-time at PFF to full-time at PFF. and just a general curiosity with the model stuff. I don't like subjective. I want to know what's predictive and why. So I spent a number of years playing around, watching YouTube videos, how to build the best model possible, just simple regression analysis, and then bumping guys up and down for meeting or not meeting various thresholds, or playing against inferior competition, or having a red flag of some sort of nature. And I started this three or 4 years ago. And this is definitely, I felt really good about it last year. And this is definitely the best version of my model yet. Very, very happy about it. Very proud of it. I think a lot of the weaknesses it has had, namely Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't know that I missed on those guys, but I was a little low on them. I finally made a big change to this model where I incorporated Wes Huber's Devy rankings, which go all the way down to like wide receiver 220, Devy wide receiver 220, which is crazy and a testament to all the hard work he's doing. But in the past, where it would have penalized a Justin Jefferson or an Amon-Ra St. Brown for not leading the team in receiving yards in his final year, instead passing the torch to a younger player, where my model would have said, like, that's a question mark. We don't know how good this player is. So this is a sort of red flag. Now it's saying, no. Jackson Smith and Jigba is the number one Devy wide receiver. So this isn't really a red flag that Garrett Wilson has never led his team in receiving yards. He's playing with a bunch of future round one players. So that was something my model missed on over the past few years that I'm confident it is capturing that sort of nuance this year.
So how do you, by incorporating that, how do you determine, or I guess maybe you don't have enough data yet, but is there a spot where it is somebody falling off versus passing the torch? Have you noticed that where you don't have somebody like Garrett Wilson that clearly seems to be very good, but it's somebody that, I don't know, who is, I'm trying to think who Pittsburgh's wide receiver was before Jordan Addison got there, because that doesn't feel like it would have been a passing the torch situation. Seems like the receiver there just really wasn't that good. And then Jordan Addison came in as a freshman and just stole the show and helped Kenny Pickett light it up.
Yeah, so in my production, I have something called a teammate score. So obviously Drake London's teammate score is really high because his quarterback play was really not good, and he competed for targets alongside high-end NFL quality wide receivers who were all much older than him. That's a very important factor. Michael Pittman, round 2, 4 years older. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Over the last 6 weeks, only Cooper Kupp scored more fantasy points, and he's 2 years older. So that really helped him. A player it didn't really help, you could say, is Christian Watson, who, I mean, I really like Christian Watson, but he played with Trey Lance, a top 3 overall draft pick, and his quarterback, his other quarterbacks expected to get drafted, and he didn't really play against any other meaningful target competition. A player really hurt was Sky Moore. You look at Sky Moore's 2021 season, and it was great. Okay, it was great, but it wasn't as great as Dwayne Eskridge's the year before. And you could say, okay, well, Dwayne Eskridge is significantly older. That's fine. But then you could also look at Jayden Reed. You can compare Sky Moore's breakout freshman season to Jayden Reed's breakout freshman season the year earlier. And Jayden Reed was younger. He played with far worse quarterback play. John Wasink versus Caleb Ellaby, who's the consensus QB8. And Dwayne Eskridge was still competing for targets as a wide receiver at that time. Whereas for Sky Moore, he was playing cornerback. So that's again, this is just one factor in my model. And it's not the biggest one, but it's something my model is going to look at. And it was an improvement over past years. And so Drake London, crushed the teammate score, and it wasn't as high for Christian Watson or for a Sky Moore.
Yeah, I love Drake London coming out. I struggle with the Mike Evans comparisons just because
Yeah.
Evans was so much bigger. And so I feel like I've been playing around trying to create my first wide receiver model in my head, and it has to do with contested catch and separation at the point of target. Like it's more to weed out like when is contested catch not really a good thing. Because I feel like if there's no if a wide receiver isn't getting separation, he may still be good at contested catches, but they're just not they just don't get open. They're just good at that, a la JJ Arcega-Whiteside, versus somebody who, somebody may get 1.5 or 2 yards of separation at the point of target because they're a lot shiftier, so they're open, but somebody getting, let's say, 3/4 of a yard or 1 yard might be good at contested catches, and that's enough separation to make it matter.
Yeah, I think I did a good job of shaping the narrative on Drake London. I had a tweet that went sort of viral. So, I mean, you look at Drake London's numbers, and last year he had the third best ever age-adjusted yards per game season in my database, which goes back to the year 2000. So that's obviously really impressive. But a high percentage of his catches came on screens, which are just basically a proxy for manufactured touches. And then he had 31% of his total catches coming on contested catches. And if you look at the top wide receiver seasons by percentage of catches coming on contested catches, you have N'Keal Harry 1, JJ Arcega-Whiteside 2, Jalen Reagor 3, Drake London 4, Denzel Mims 5. And is that not just a list of the top busts over the past 5 or so seasons? And then if you go back to a larger sample, you have Laquan Treadwell, you'll have Josh Doxson. You look at the top 30 of the list, it's all busts or players whose names you've never heard of before. And obviously, this is a massive red flag. I think it should be. If Drake London doesn't hit, I mean, like, this could be like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, where just everyone's writing off contested catch guys. But lo and behold, my model said Drake London was the number one wide receiver in the class by the production model, not the athleticism model, or by the combined models. I'm still not sure yet. But yeah, so this is tricky, and he has a damning red flag, but every wide receiver in this class has a damning red flag. And I'll say this, I watched the tape. I loved the tape. He didn't get separation like a Jamison Williams, of course. He always had a cornerback within touching distance of him, but he was amazing at maneuvering his body to position himself so that he has, 10 yards of space with nothing else in between him, and the cornerback draped on his back shoulder, or he has the sideline, and he can make some ridiculous catches. He had the best contested catch rate, which is contested catches versus contested targets. You could argue he's turning 50-50 balls into 70-30 balls, which is crazy. But yeah, the separation concerns, and he didn't help himself with that narrative by avoiding the 40-yard dash this pro day. But we'll get into these wide receivers, and they all have, unfortunately, I think, really scary red flags in sort of proportional degree to how much my model liked them.
So with so many wide receivers and I guess players in general not running the 3 cone, did that impact your model significantly?
It only hurt the smaller guys. It only hurt the smaller guys. The 3 cone is only really predictive for the smaller guys at both running back and wide receiver. Some of those running backs, they ran the 3 cone. Tyler Goodson was a running back who crushed the 3 cone and skyrocketed up in my rankings. I mean, still very, very low tier. He was like above like Bryant Koback and, names like that. Brian Robinson, a sub 5 percentile 3 cone. Damian Pierce, one of the worst 3 cones ever. So those were concerning. But yeah, it's really only the smaller by height for wide receivers and smaller by weight running backs where that's a predictive variable.
Is that generally because we expect bigger backs to, I guess, move the pile? So
yeah, it's just not as yeah. I mean, like a Ramondre Stevenson, really bad 40, really impressive 3 cone, and you sort of see that on tape. But typically, yeah, it's just they're not being used in the same way as like a James Cook is going to be used. as like a James White, Theo Riddick type. Christian McCaffrey will be used. A Reggie Bush will be used. And so Tyler Goodson, his athletic profile kind of fits that mold, which is a little exciting, but it also caps his upside. So my model's not really high on smaller, lighter, skinnier backs anyway.
So it seemed like last year quarterback was the big position going into the draft. And this year we have an interesting kind of group of quarterbacks. But if we were to line up 20 fantasy analysts, we'd probably all have a different order for our top 5. Was there anyone that surprised you of these kind of quarterbacks you put through the model? Anyone that you have high hopes for now?
Yeah, again, I don't have a model for quarterback. I've tried to build one. I just haven't found anything predictive. So what I do with the quarterback position is I really just go off of projected draft capital. I'll talk to the top film experts at my site, and I'll give a heavy weighting towards hypermobile quarterbacks. So I like Malik Willis. I think he's a pluser version of Jalen Hurts coming out. So wherever you took Jalen Hurts, I'd have him a little bit higher. But yeah, really not too high in this quarterback class as a whole. I think QB2, I have Sam Howell just because you could argue similar rushing upside to Desmond Ridder. Ridder, of course, has the more impressive 40, but Ritter's best season by rushing fantasy points per game is similar to Howell's best season by rushing fantasy points per game. I really just talking to film experts, they're like, Ritter's maybe the sharpest quarterback in the class. Before the ball's thrown, like best quarterback in the class. And then once the ball's thrown, you kind of hate him because he's hyper inaccurate. So they really like Sam Howell. I have Howell 2. Then I have Ridder 3. Then I have Pickett 4. But they're all in this close 3 quarterback tier just because Pickett has the best expected draft capital, but not much rushing upside. But really, I really didn't spend too much time on quarterback. So if I'm dead wrong on that, that wouldn't shock me.
Well,
not a great year to be a super flex. Not a great year to have the top pick in super flex if you have no quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So when you've worked on this model now for like, this is the 3rd year or 4th year you said?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the changes that, like, how is there been significant changes? Are you at the tweaking point? How do you go back for aspiring guys, how do you go back and critique your own model to make it better?
Yeah, so it just naturally gets better every year because you have a larger, more robust sample. And then I'll always spend work trying to look back over misses and hits. Luckily, I don't think there was any miss last year. I had Ramondre over Trey Sermon, and then I like a coward, I caved to expected draft capital, and I'll just not make that same mistake again. I'm on Ross St. Brown. I think I was a little too low on him, and I told you about the change I made there. But in years past, looking back at some of my biggest misses, Caleb Wilson, tight end out of UCLA. The question now is Greg Dulcich. Does my model have a bias in favor of Chip Kelly tight ends? Maybe. That's just a question I'm asking. I haven't made any changes there. It always had a bias in favor of Mike Leach running backs. Boobie Williams one year I was very high on. And so I've learned to just make a manual adjustment against Mike Leach running backs. And just, yeah, I guess just several things like that, being aware of and trying to look back at misses and see, Tyler Johnson was the other one. And so the concern with him, the production model loved him. And then he opted out of every event at the combine in his pro day. And so I manually adjusted him downwards. I viewed that as a red flag, indicative of bottom 33rd percentile athleticism. And so I have a question now is like, do I do the same thing with Drake London? I mean, he said he was only 95% healthy. He was also, every mock draft had him top 15. So it's like he had nothing to gain and a lot to lose. Do I do the same thing there? And I just don't know. I've had my rankings set in stone for the past 48 hours minus my top 3 wide receivers. And I've just gone back and forth and back and forth. Garrett Wilson's the safest, but my production model liked him the least of the top 3. Jamison Williams has red flags. Drake London has red flags, but my model liked him the most. And it's just, it's something I've just been waffling on. And it, I don't want to give a tie. I feel like that's, the coward's way out, but it's just tricky. It's because I make these models to be more objective. And then there's this influx of subjectivity given the contested catch stuff. He didn't participate at the combine, neither did Jamison Williams. And it's just tricky.
Feels like there's so many of these kind of top wide receivers that are coming back from big injuries this year too, which makes it difficult. It's quite a few of them coming off of torn ACLs. London had the ankle that was messed up. So that it's hard to know if that plays into some of their decisions about testing.
George Pickens, like he had, by my data, a brutal combine, really low BMI, but how much is that due to the injury? John Mechie, ACL, Jamison Williams, ACL, Drake London, the ankle. There was another guy too. Yeah, it's tricky. Garrett Prince, apparently his pro day was abhorrent because he shouldn't have tested. Same thing for Justin Ross. Apparently he didn't train at all because he literally couldn't. And so, I like the objective, and then here's a bunch of subjective factors murkying.
I bet Kyron Williams wishes he hadn't tested at the combine too.
Yeah, he's another one. David Bell.
Yeah. Well, if Drake London gets drafted by the Buccaneers, you can go ahead and drop him down your rankings because that's part of what happened to Tyler Johnson. You're not getting past Godwin and Evans.
Where did you have Bell at before his athletic testing? How did you feel about him? How'd your production model like him?
Yeah, I was really surprised he ranked as low as he did. He ranked wide receiver 10. Oh, I split my wide receiver model up into Power 5 versus non-Power 5. So within the Power 5, wide receiver 10, which means probably wide receiver 10 overall. But I expected him to rank a lot higher. You look at his numbers, and they're pretty obscene. He ranks 6th best since 2000 in career yards per game, 2nd in career receptions per game. But it was a lot of the sort of secondary and tertiary stuff that pushed him down. And you dig deeper, you can see, he was below average in separation rate every year and things of that nature. He's a tricky one. I've had film experts I trust say he's a Keenan Allen clone, and it's like, whoa, that's crazy. But in general, I'll probably be lower on him than consensus.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's my Ohio State bias, but I just never really was a big fan of him at Purdue. I felt like he could do some things okay, but he didn't really have competition for it. Is kind of, I guess, he didn't have would that be a low teammate score or a high teammate score?
If it would be a low one because Rondale Moore was rarely healthy in those 2 seasons.
Him. That's right. I knew I was missing something.
I'll also look at track records of various head coaches and offensive coordinators. And so Jeff Brom, Rondale Moore, everyone was in love with Rondale Moore. Is he a bust? I think it's too early to lean any one way in particular. But the wide receiver before that everyone loved was Taywan Taylor, another Jeff Brom wide receiver 1. And so that's just a question I'll raise at this point. It was a question that I thought was a little more substantial with Rashad White, whose offensive coordinator's RB1 has always smashed. But that's just another thing I look at, and it didn't factor into his ranking, but it's just a question.
You piqued Dennis' interest with Rashad White.
Yeah, I was gonna say, speaking of Rashad White, I feel like, he only had the one real year of productivity in college football. but he's a really good pass catcher. But I didn't watch a lot of Pac-12, Pac-10 football. I forget Pac whatever, what their number is now. I didn't watch a lot of college football. So was it a function of like a Mike Leach offense where the guy just gets the running back a lot of receptions? Or is that going to be something that translates to the NFL, that he's going to be whether it's a good handcuff because he can catch the ball and he's got the size to run it, or is he a legitimate threat to be a starting running back?
Yeah, so you look at Zach Hill's RB1 in 6 seasons as a college offensive coordinator. Jeremy McNichols' numbers in 2016 were far better than anything Rashad White did. Alexander Madison, the same thing, comparable to George Holani in 2019. And didn't see a ton of volume, but hyper efficient. He was the most efficient of any of those running backs. I personally have a bias in favor of bell cow running backs. I want highest end running backs who both get a lot of carries and get a lot of targets. And if you're not one of those, I don't want to waste draft capital gambling on you. So I really go all the way at the top with the running back position, or I'm not touching you. And it's interesting. My model sort of has the same bias. So what it did like with Rashad White was hyper elite receiving efficiency, really strong receiving productivity. And he also had a fantastic combine to back it up. So that's going to be my RB4. Could I miss on him? Sure. But I do like his bell cow upside.
Yeah, I tend to have a bias for those kind of backs myself. It just stands to reason. The more opportunity you have, the more opportunity you have to score points for fantasy. So, so as we look at your model, like which players stand to get or have the biggest, be most? Let me say that all in English now. Which players coming in have the most opportunity to be impacted by draft capital, whether positive or negative? Are there any players that jump out to where you say, well, if this player goes early, they're going to move way up, or if this player goes late, they're going to drop way down?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's basically every player. The most predictive variable is always going to be draft capital. You know, a team takes you in round one, they're now invested in your success. So you're going to get more excuses. You're going to get more touches, more opportunities to succeed because they want you to succeed. They don't want to look foolish. It's especially important at the running back position. Landing spot also matters more at the running back position than the others. I mean, Breece Hall's the man, but like, what if this would never happen? But what if Pittsburgh drafts him? Yeah, then, he's going to plummet down my rankings, as he should. But yeah, that's really every player. I'm most excited about Justin Ross. You just look at the production profile and you sort of excuse the 2022 season due to the fact that he had a broken bone in his foot for every single game he played. He didn't really practice at all in the offseason. He had bottom 5 quarterback play. And you look at the production profile and it's incredible, but you have to factor in it's low end day 3 projected draft capital, massive injury red flags. George Pickens is another one. There's weird rumors coming out about character concerns, and he didn't help himself. The recent accident where he was a passenger in a car and the driver was arrested. This was like 2 days ago. My model really liked him. Greg Cosell said this is the best wide receiver in the class, and yet he's probably going to be drafted round 3. And so really it matters a ton to every single guy.
So what's sort of the range? Like if a player is expected to go, let's say, first 10 picks of round 2, and they don't go until the last 10 picks of round 3, is that a big enough impact to swing them in your model?
Yeah, I mean it's a massive gap. I think you could just rank players based on where they're drafted in the NFL draft. And that's like a pretty good list, it's really hard to beat the NFL. It's really hard to beat the NFL draft. I try to. I like to think. I like to hope maybe I can, but it's tough. A round 1 to round 3 swing is massive. Even a top 15 to bottom 5 in the first round swing is pretty big. A lot of people are going to just gravitate towards whichever wide receiver ends up in Green Bay or Kansas City. But am I going to put this guy who was drafted as the wide receiver 5 ahead of the wide receiver 2? I probably wouldn't do that.
Do you think that we need to adjust our draft capital impressions for running back specifically, since there has been such a shift towards devaluation? Like we rarely, over the past few years, we have very few RB1s or first round running backs, but then they start to hit in second and third. So should we start to view, second round, maybe the mid third, the way we used to view round 1 running backs, and kind of shift it back so that early day 3 running backs are now should be viewed maybe round 4 and 5 viewed like we used to view round 3? Should we be making that adjustment in how we look at running backs and what their potential looks like?
Yeah, I think that's fairly intuitive. I think that's probably right. And still, you would just rank within the class by the order in which they were drafted. And there's something to be said for, a first round pick makes more money. They get the 5th year. And so another year in the same team, in the same scheme with the team that's invested in them, that drafted them, that likes them. But yeah, I think that's mostly right.
Well, so let's add wide receivers in there then. So if we have 7 wide receivers go in the first round this year, and Breece Hall is the first running back off the board, early second round, do we still move Breece Hall up to the first pick in our fantasy football rookie drafts, our dynasty rookie drafts, because he's a running back? Do we move him 3rd or 4th behind the wide receivers?
Right. Yeah. I probably wouldn't spend too much time weighting running backs versus wide receivers for exactly that reason. I think that's a good point. And especially this year, all these wide receivers demanding more money, demanding trades. Everyone's saying it's going to push up round 2 talents into round 1. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Is there anyone who, maybe didn't have a good offseason, good combine that your model really liked that you think people are sleeping on?
Yeah. So running backs, I was talking to one of you before the show started. I have Isaiah Spiller's my RB7. It's just the production model didn't love him. The athleticism model didn't love him. And then I have it Brian Robinson, Rashad White, Damian Pierce, Tyler Algier. And really none of those guys had good combines or pro days. Damian Pierce had one of the worst 3 cones ever. Brian Robinson, sub 5 percentile 3 cone. It doesn't really matter as much at their size, but I feel good about it. But that's also a testament to this is a fairly gross running back class. Yeah.
So do you not? We're starting to hear more of a narrative that there's no high end talent, but it's really deep. So are you not buying that narrative, or do you buy it as in it's really deep, as in it's going to provide a lot of backups for multiple years?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not good, but it's deep. It's like, okay, I don't care about deep. I care about, is it good or not? It's like, what is like a James White caliber running back worth in fantasy, especially dynasty? And it's like basically nothing. So again, my strategy at the position is I want high bell cow running backs. I was loading up on Javonte Williams and Najee Harris in rookie drafts last year. So I'll like the top 2 running backs in this class, but then I'm probably not wasting any draft capital trying to chase the other guys. Like I have Brian Robinson's my RB3, but I view him as Alexander Madison 2.0. And what's Alexander Madison worth in dynasty leagues? Practically nothing, So I'll take the top two, and then otherwise I'll just load up on wide receivers and maybe a Trey McBride here or there.
So based on your model, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so I apologize about this. Based on your model, I know that you like those two running backs. We were talking a little bit before the show about some of your wide receivers as well. Where do you kind of think the cutoff is then? Because we just talked about we don't think the class is deep. It's more kind of high end. I know some people have said like right around that 2, 3 in just a normal, not super flex, just your straight up 1 QB dynasty league. That's kind of where maybe you want to start pivoting and see if you can trade those picks. Is that kind of where you would go as well? As it earlier on? Is it in the back end of the first round?
It's probably like right around like 202, somewhere around there, assuming everyone makes the perfect pick. Maybe, John Moore, then John Mechie, then Sky Moore, then Alec Pierce goes, and then, Jalen Tolbert, like right around there, maybe right a pick before Jalen Tolbert or a pick after, depending on how you feel about him, assuming Trey McBride already goes and the top two running backs go and Malik Willis goes.
Awesome. All right.
So I've been warming up to John Mechie. I kind of view him as like his ceiling as peak slot juju. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I like him. There were some of these guys where my model liked a little bit more than I had anticipated. John Mechie, wide receiver 9. Yeah, maybe I might even like him more than my model did, but it's like I fell in love with him as I was writing it up. Like it was just very easy for me to make the bull case argument for him. Teammate score had a really high-end teammate score in 2020 when Waddle, Smith, and Mechie were all healthy. He held his own. He had 72% as many yards as Devonta Smith, on 80% as many routes run, and on only 38% as many targets. And he had a stress fracture in his shin for 30% of that season. He sat out of practice the entire time. The following season, he was not yet 100% healthy, and the data backs that up. Through the first 5 games, he averaged 55 yards per game, and then across the final 8, 108.4 yards per game. And he was competing against Jamison Williams, who's the top wide receiver for many of these mock drafters. And you look at the Alabama track record of receivers to have multiple seasons with 900 receiving yards, and every single one went in round 1. So I think Mechie is interesting, if only for that reason.
There was another wide receiver we talked about before the show that you said was kind of surprising that he was good in your model, and that was Alec Pierce. You said you watched a little bit of him, and then you were like, okay, I kind of like him as well. He ranked out and just I do film grades. I don't do a lot of analytics stuff, mostly because I don't understand that. If you ask me a math question, 2 + 2 is 6. I'm just horrible with it. So I try to learn the analytics side of stuff, but it hasn't really worked out for me. I think he's a really good. You mentioned before, obviously we weren't recording, that his athleticism stood out. I think he's a really good route runner as well. Where is he at in your model, and what kind of draft capital would he have to secure to kind of stay there? Because there's a lot of talk that some NFL teams like him, but that he could fall some in the draft.
Yeah, so to clarify, the athleticism model, my custom stats, Spork score, which looks only at the most predictive athletic measurables, defined within positions by various archetypes, said he was a hyper freak athlete. Really liked him there. The production model did not like him. And the reason it did not like him was because he had supposedly a fringe round 1, early round 2 quarterback, which implies really good quarterback play. Although we both know, like, I did not see that. And minimal target competition. He had Josiah DeGuara early on in his career, and then nothing beyond that. And his best season wasn't even better than Khalil Lewis's best season in Desmond Ritter's freshman season. Who's Khalil Lewis? I have no idea. And so it was a number of things where, outside of the athleticism, my model did not like him. And then I watched the tape, and I'm not a tape guy. I love the tape. He has unreal burst, unreal get off the line, very fast. He was getting Jamison Williams type cushions, and he was beating it. He was beating it and then generating 2 steps of separation. And his short underneath stuff is incredible, massive separation. And I don't know why they didn't just keep doing that, because he was always open. He was always catching it. He was always converting first downs or coming close to the sticks. And he just didn't have impressive numbers, but I think he really should have. And part of that too is, some of the throws Desmond Ridder was making were awful. 3 yards, 5 yards off of where it otherwise should be, drawing him back into coverage. And so he really impressed me. I really liked his tape. I'm going to probably stay true to my combined models with him, but I did really like him, and I wouldn't be shocked if he goes early round 2.
Yeah, I'm probably the biggest fan of Ritter on this podcast, and I've said consistently I think I think he should be a round 2 pick, and he's likely a backup quarterback in the NFL. But I did a like film thing on him for our YouTube channel, and like some of the highlights that I put on there was literally like Alec Pierce is wide open, and Desmond Ridder threw it like 5 yards behind him that he had to stop, turn around, go back and get the ball, and then he was tackled for what should have been like an easy 60-yard touchdown. And that was kind of he just seems to like project it when it's going deep. He doesn't really throw it like you would see a Malik Willis throw. He doesn't really have that quite of a gun. So yeah, it definitely hurt Alec Pierce. I'm excited to see what happens with him.
So a little silly season breaking news here. Aaron Nagler is reporting that the Packers have engaged in trade talks with the Raiders for Darren Waller.
Wow. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'd love it because I'm a huge Foster Moreau guy, and I don't think that I think Moreau fits with Devontae Adams a lot better than what Waller does. Now, Moreau's still probably a tight end 10 range, but it'd be good for Waller, be good for Rodgers, certainly. Not Amari Rodgers, but
amusing that they couldn't get themselves together though. Since Adams went
they were
from the
trading
Packers
Devontae
to the Raiders,
Adams,
it's like, oh, maybe we didn't ask for the right trade compensation.
I mean, I'd love for them to go get Debo, but I don't know if that's possible. So, Dennis, Matt, anything else you guys have left for Scott, so we can let him get out of here?
So the only question I have left is I was reading through your fantasy or your combine winners and losers article from after the combine, and by and large, other than Watson and Sky Moore, a lot of the receivers you have in the loser category, that they didn't do themselves any favors. Amongst the wide receivers and the running backs as well, are there any of the people that since the combine that kind of came out on the poor end of your assessment there, are they starting to work their way back up? Is anybody making strides to kind of get back into the, where they were pre-combine?
I'll say, maybe this isn't a direct answer to your question. I think my attention trailed off at the end of it, but Isaiah Weston was someone.
That was my question.
No, I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else. Isaiah Weston was someone I hadn't heard at all about, and then he's very old, but he had a really great, and he's very small school, but he had a really impressive combine, one of the best combines in recent memory. Not quite on Christian Watson's level, but a really impressive combine. And, the production model didn't love him, but some of his stats were really interesting. He had over 1,000 receiving yards and fewer than 45 receptions in 2019. T.Y. Hilton is one of only 3 other wide receivers to come away with marks like that on such a small amount of catches. And then last year, 883 yards, only 37 receptions. And so he ranks since 2014, 7th best of over 1,000 qualifiers in career yards per target average. Only Jalen Waddle, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jamison Williams, Marquise Brown, and Devonta Smith ranked above him. And so it piqued my curiosity. I was like, could this guy be my new Jacob Harris, who I really liked last year, just based solely on his athletic profile? And then I hadn't heard a single word about him. And then Jeff Legwold, who is supposedly one of the most accurate mock draft guys, had him as his 100th ranked player. So he's someone who popped back up on my radar. But what was your actual question? Maybe I can answer that.
Well, I was just more, you had like guys like Garrett Wilson and Drake London kind of on the loser side of it. And I was wondering, have any of the guys started to kind of make their way back for you? Are they getting some victories between the combine and now?
Yeah, well, I mean, all those guys smashed my production model in my production model. So, it was concerning, but then again, like those were all the top guys. So it's tricky. What I do say in the article and in another one called How Important is Athleticism is that athleticism in general is very overrated. And it's extremely overrated at the wide receiver position. It's underrated at the tight end position, but overrated at the wide receiver position. And it's extra, especially overrated for slot wide receivers. So maybe that's a way for David Bell to make up some ground. But yeah, really when doing these rankings, I kind of didn't weight athleticism as much as maybe I typically do, just because all these guys really underwhelmed. For some of them too, you like George Pickens, you can argue that was injury related. And so it didn't penalize him as much, but yeah, again, it's also a very skinny class. I said it was the skinniest class ever. It was also the fastest class, and just maybe the NFL is trending in that direction. So earlier I would list very low BMI as a red flag, and I think that's right to do so. You get into some trouble with some physical cornerbacks in press coverage, or they can bully you when you're close to the sideline. But this class is going to be a great test for that, because there's a lot of skinny guys in this class.
Yeah. So it's 25 BMI is kind of the cutoff, right? I
mean, the lower you go, the bigger of a red flag it gets. I mean, Jameson Williams and again, that could be due to training issues. Jameson Williams has a lower BMI than Devonta Smith. And we spent all last offseason nitpicking Devonta Smith. And this is even worse than that. So, I mean, look at the guys who are drafted at a sub 23.0 BMI, and it's like Todd Pinkston and no one else. So JJ Nelson. But yeah, I mean, it's concerning.
So do you think, though, that there's a case to be made if a lot of these guys that are in the 24s, that maybe there's a case to be made for lowering the threshold, or is that something we just want to say, well, it happens?
I mean, I think 2022 is going to be a great year. Again, the more data you have, the more predictive you're going to be. And, Devonta Smith, I think he'll easily crack 1,000 yards, and, maybe one of these other guys does too. And then it seems like less of a red flag, and especially if you weight it more heavily in recent seasons, because again, maybe the NFL is moving closer in that direction.
Fair enough.
Well, Scott, we appreciate you taking almost an hour out of your day to come talk with us and educate us on some of these rookies. You guys can follow Scott at Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter. He is with Fantasy Points, who is, in my opinion, one of the better sites around. Scott, anything you want to tell our listeners, anything you've got in the works that we can look out for?
Yeah, if you're just interested in my draft guide and all the work that goes into it, you can check my pinned tweet at Scott Barrett DFB. It's basically like a draft guide. And so if you're watching the draft and your team drafts Tyquan Thornton round 3, you're like, who's that? You can pull up my wide receiver article. You can take a look at what I wrote, if I was high on him or low on him, and why, what's to like, what a potential red flag might be. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me, guys. This was a blast.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. Now I have to watch you in the fantasy league draft and see where your picks are. See if I want to go get some.